our NIPSCO bills within the last year have not only doubled but tripled. And what we saw in our surrounding communities were when, I attended the NIPSCO protest, I saw they were able to get out and, get direct answers to the neighboring cities that are predominantly white, that have these high median household incomes. The average median household income here is only $40,000 a year for a two-family home. So these other locations were given a rebate where they apologized and said, hey, we had an issue with our automated meters. They switched everyone's meters to be automatic now, meaning they can shut your power off directly from the NIPSCO location. They don't have to come out and hit a switch. And once they installed these smart meters, they started hiking up our bills. So everyone in the surrounding areas were able to get a rebate, a credit on their bill that was a lot. And they told Gary, well, there's nothing wrong with your meters. Your prices are high because we had an increase that we had to do. Now, this increase was a result of our neighboring cities getting these infrastructure deals for data centers and these tax breaks, which left, for what NIPSCO says, a big issue with this residual money that we have to pay. So they passed that off to consumers, just like with tariffs. And we saw how that impacted the same thing, but Gary was given the big bill.
Gary, Indiana has kind of come into national headlines and even some international headlines because it was without power for nearly 2 weeks. And this started on August 11th when 100-mile-per-hour winds pummeled Northwest Indiana, knocking out power to more than 370,000 customers of NIPSCO, the regional for-profit electrical utility. NIPSCO had said that Gary would be the last municipality to have service restored and has promised that it will be fully restored by tonight, August 25th, which is 2 weeks after the storm. The power outage has disrupted all aspects of life across the region and in Gary. Viewers may remember what we reported on last week with regards to the rolling blackouts in Cuba. Having no power means, that people are unable to store food. It means that school has to be canceled. There's been no clear date for when campuses will be reopened. It also means no running water for households and no safe backups, for example, people who rely on breathing machines. Cell phone coverage and internet connectivity are also impacted because, you guessed it, the cell towers are also affected by the power outages. So amidst all of this, it is very important to point out that Gary, the town that has been without power for the longest, is a majority Black city. 76% of residents are Black and over 33% of the population lives below the poverty line. The city is no stranger to neglect from state and corporate leaders. So to discuss this crisis and what else is actually behind it, we are joined by Aza Bridges, an independent journalist from Gary, Indiana. Aja, thank you so much for joining us here at BT Live.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Good. Aja, it's been 2 weeks since power was knocked out in your hometown. You have been reporting extensively on the ground about what is behind the crisis and who's profiting from it. But before we get into that, we first wanted to hear from you about what these past days have been like. How has your daily life been impacted? How have you been able to get through this? And what has it been like for your neighbors and your family?
So, prior to the storm, the children were going back to school. It was just normal life. I think the biggest thing that has changed is my children's lives. I have an autistic daughter who needs her tablet to communicate and also needs her tablet for herself. And she has not had access to the internet. And it is very hard to explain that they, have to deal with these changes because it's not their fault. The biggest thing is seeing how NIPSCO basically forgot about us for the first 5 days. We didn't hear anything. We didn't see a NIPSCO truck. And NIPSCO was putting out these progressive updates for the cities around us that are predominantly white, and we were left out. We were told we were under further whatever they called it, right? They had to come and assess further damages while we watched things like the fair get power, right? And we're still sitting here saying we can't even refrigerate food. You know, our children are going to be left behind when it comes to test scores because other schools are being put in the forefront of receiving help. And now we're seeing like it just kept going day by day by day until it got to a point where we had to scream like, hey, we're here, we need help, we have children. You know, it was very chaotic at the beginning because if you don't have power, we are a very small community. I live in a food desert, so we don't have big grocery stores. We have one little grocery store, a couple gas stations, and some Family Dollars, and they were all closed. So not only could you not rely on the power in your house, but you didn't have gas for your vehicle. And we have a large population of elderly that cannot travel, that rely on medical equipment, like you said, that did not have access to those things. And NIPSCO, no matter how high our bills were, even though we're absorbing the cost of infrastructure updates to surrounding cities, we did not reap any of those benefits and were left in the dark for quite a long time.
I mean, that is just wild. And to hear that happening in, the richest country in the world, just total neglect. And I wanna ask you if you could elaborate a bit on this electricity company, NIPSCO, because many residents, including to what you just said, many residents have accused NIPSCO of deliberate neglect towards the people of the state, but specifically towards the people of Gary, all while they're making these record profits. So, can you break down this particular thread for us?
Absolutely. So we call them Ripsco, right? Because even though we didn't have power, our bills are still astronomically high. I mean, before they restored power, I got my bill for $354 for 1 month. Okay, that doesn't include water and it doesn't include sanitation. NIPSCO, for because I also attended a NIPSCO protest, right? I've been on the front lines protesting these tax hikes. They had to take it before council, and our NIPSCO bills within the last year have not only doubled but tripled. And what we saw in our surrounding communities were when, I attended the NIPSCO protest, I saw they were able to get out and, get direct answers to the neighboring cities that are predominantly white that have these high median household incomes. The average median household income here is only $40,000 a year for a two-family home. So these other locations were given a rebate where they apologized and said, hey, we had an issue with our automated meters. They switched everyone's meters to be automatic now, meaning they can shut your power off directly from the NIPSCO location. They don't have to come out and hit a switch. And once they installed these smart meters, they started hiking up our bills. So everyone in the surrounding areas were able to get a rebate, a credit on their bill that was a lot. And they told Gary, well, there's nothing wrong with your meters. Your prices are high because we had an increase that we had to do. Now, this increase was a result of our neighboring cities getting these infrastructure deals for data centers and these tax breaks, which left, for what NIPSCO says, a big issue with this residual money that we had to pay. So they passed that off to consumers, just like with tariffs. And we saw how that impacted the same thing, but Gary was given the big bill. And we've been struggling to pay it. I know I call every month trying to get a breakdown. Like, how are we getting $100 for delivery of services and no one's out here bringing gas to, the house to plug up? So there's like these minuscule fees that have been added and Gary has like literally paid it this entire time. So when the power went out, you would expect, my bill over the winter months, negative degrees, my bill was $600 and it has to be paid. There is no IOU to NIPSCO. It's completely you pay it or it's off now. And we were expecting rapid efforts, right? We're seeing NIPSCO trucks everywhere else, but not here. So when I really realized the situation was getting dire was when I have a neighbor next door who relies on oxygen and she doesn't have a generator. She can't afford a generator. A lot of people are on fixed incomes. The issue with NIPSCO is they made record profits, but the people they made the profits from were left out of the equation. And even with like these last 3 days, the amount of coverage this has gotten has absolutely contributed to. I'm not sure if the NIPSCO CEO said, "Hey, they're watching now. We're in the fire. We need to get somebody out here now." And they have just now been going block by block, getting things, trees, overgrown vegetation, because that's what our money's supposed to go to for NIPSCO. They're supposed to manage the leaves, manage the trees, make sure our power lines aren't engulfed in, 18 feet oak trees. And they have not been doing that with the money. So my biggest question is, where is the money going and where has it gone? Because you didn't have it when you needed it, and it's no one's fault but yours.
I mean, it's so many layers of criminality. It's insane. But something you've touched on, Aja, is that Gary, Indiana, is a majority Black city, and one that has been economically and politically marginalized throughout history, having been devastated by deindustrialization and the impact on people's incomes, on people's livelihoods, cuts to public sector fundings. We know there's been a slew of public schools that have been shut down, and also episodes of police violence. So can you talk about how this power outage, and you've reflected on it a bit, but is part of this legacy of structural racism against this majority Black city?
Absolutely. So for the last, I would say, since the election, we have been under gentrification, which means they have strategically been putting in the effort to not only ostracize, but remove us from where we are. We could not go to local gas stations, libraries, even to walk down the street without every possible police force that aren't even our police force stopping us, pulling us over. Where are you going? What are you doing? And it directly coincided with the ICE efforts for some reason. There's a predominantly Hispanic community that has hundreds of thousands. It's more predominantly Hispanic. We are all isolated by zip code in Indiana. And the police were coming every day, county, sheriff, from all over Indiana, they were coming here. And I, for the life of me, could not understand why until I started seeing some of the laws that were being passed in Indiana specifically by our governor, who a lot of people don't even know have like direct ties to Donald Trump. I mean, he can get Donald Trump on the phone any moment he wants. They were trying to put like a lot of Turning Point USA chapters into the colleges out here. Governor Braun, specifically the college I used to go to because I left for this reason, he completely took away the board, right? And he replaced himself on that board. And in Indiana, they've been going over all of our like college mission statements, any of our textbooks, removing anything that remotely says diversity, inclusion, equity, or calls out specific statistics that deal with individuals and people of color. That coincides with, like we have people fighting for a stadium to come out here. They're trying to turn Gary into every other city out here, right? They don't want it to be predominantly Black. They want it to be what it was back in the 1800s, before they completely abandon it, because they've been doing partnerships with the steel mill now, because that's like a big thing for Donald Trump. They're trying to get different exporters here. And so, with the rapid change of politics, right, we have been subjected to some of the most unfair scrutiny and unfair treatment, and it falls on the residents, even though we're the people that are going out here saying, hey, we're being mistreated. All the money that we're supposed to be getting to update our infrastructure, we're not receiving it. And even with the FEMA wasn't here when this happened, right? Red Cross wasn't here when this first happened. Salvation Army was here, but they were telling us they had no resources. 211 is closed. Reach out to your local shelter, who also doesn't have power. So Gary, Indiana has been under this rapid gentrification that has completely torn apart our community. And then they came in with the redistricting, oh, well, this is what we're going to do. You're going to be this person. You're going to be over here. Trying to just like drum up a lot of confusion for our location. And I think they purposefully left us out because they wanted chaos, right?
Mm.
They wanted us to turn on each other. They wanted this to be, well, this is why we didn't help you. This is why we stayed away. You have fed into the stereotype. And despite all of that, our community remained hunkered down. We remained together. We had cookouts, we had barbecue, but we still complained because there was no reason that it took for a celebrity, right, to say, I'm going to stop in Gary and we're going to have food for everyone. It took a celebrity for me to see a NIPSCO truck 2 days ago and for our children to have a school. And it's absolutely despicable because our governor is just now saying, oh, well, I'm going to launch an investigation into NIPSCO to see if there was a proper use of funds. Um, who cares about the funds? Let's talk about the actions behind what NIPSCO did and didn't do. And it's all a ruse because after the lights come back on, where there's another possible tornado that's supposed to come tonight and tomorrow. So who's to say they won't do it again? But it was very distasteful to get these updates, right? They're going by cities. This day, this day, this day, this day. The first three that came out within the first 7 days did not include Gary, Indiana. It did not. So all of a sudden for them to be like, oh, we hopefully the us hearing about today for the power getting restored was not put out until Saturday, late Saturday, Sunday.
So you mentioned the Trumpian governor that you have, this businessman turned governor, Mike Braun of Indiana. He's called for, like you said, an informal investigation into NIPSCO over this crisis. It sounds like that's not enough for the people of Gary, obviously, for the reasons that you mentioned. So what are people on the ground demanding after having suffered through this? And then I also wanted to throw in another question in here, and that's, you mentioned earlier data centers, and I'm curious where that fits into all of this.
So I know the people on the ground right now, like the community outreach has been beautiful, right? We have managed to scrape resources when resources were denied. Our governor has left Gary out of the picture since he was in it. Gary doesn't get any of the help or resources other communities do. When you saw the governor doing his photo ops in front of down branches and trees, he never visited Gary. I mean, I've never seen him in Gary. I've never seen him talk to a citizen of Gary, right? And him saying that he's going to investigate NIPSCO was just to try to save his tail for this election coming up and everyone else's election involved. And here in Indiana, and especially Gary, we are fired up to vote. Okay, we are ready to go to the polls. We don't care if they redistrict us 12 times. We are going to make sure we show up and show out for our community because we have seen firsthand the catastrophic events that can ensue if we don't have elected officials in place. As far as the data centers, I know all communities, all cities, especially three to name the few, have been fighting these data centers as like tooth and nail, right? We've been showing up because we already don't have enough for ourselves. And NIPSCO has strategically partnered with AES, and I'm not going to say who just bought out AES Indiana. I'm not going to elaborate on the privatization of the Indiana power grid that contribute to the tax hikes of our bills. But just know the data centers are prioritized and continue to have power, and they're sucking up the resources and passing it off as, oh, well, we got to hike your bills because you're using more, when in all actuality, we are being sucked dry to fund infrastructure that goes towards data centers, and they're prioritizing private energy right now at this moment. And this blackout should show everyone that is their only concern.
Well, Aza Bridges, thank you so much for tying all this together, breaking it down, showing us what's at the root of this, really criminal crisis that the people of Gary are facing. We'll surely be coming back to you in the future to hear more about this. But for now, thank you so much for joining us here on BT Live.
Thank you. You guys have a good one. Thank you so much for having me.